Whoops. We don't care about that, do we?
All right, well, welcome everybody. You made it to the launch of the fall EECS Colloquium series. Welcome. You've made it here. My name's Eric Pauls. I want to welcome you formally with my co-chair up front, Eli Abranovich, to what should be a really great season. And I can't wait to get to our speaker today. Let me just give you a couple tiny teaser announcements for what's coming up. Please plan on coming every Wednesday. We have a great lineup this whole semester. Next week will be Jim Keller. He's a senior vice president at Intel with a great intro by our own dean, Sujay. Then after that, I messed up. Sorry. Next week is Saif Salahuddin is faculty here at Berkeley, then followed by Jim Keller. And then on September 25th will be Rod Brooks from the MIT AI Lab and also Xconomy. So many things to look forward to. The whole schedule's online, so plan ahead for that. I want to give the time to our speaker today. I'm very excited. I think a lot of what we do in computer science and in engineering embodies deep science, theory, but also a humanist viewpoint. And I think Joe embodies many of those traits in such an excellent form. Joe is a professor in media arts and science at the MIT Media Lab. He runs a responsive environments group, which does a lot of very fascinating technical projects, which you'll get a chance to see. Joe actually comes from an interesting background. He got his bachelor's from Tufts and his PhD in physics from MIT. He then went off and developed spacecraft controls and different sensors at Draper Labs. Had a chance to work at ETH Zurich and CERN. Lots of interactions in some deep physics, and he takes those materials and does very creative manifestations of that with his research. He joined the Media Lab soon after that, and the work that he largely focuses on covers, wireless energy, wireless sensing, sensors, energy harvesting, space-based systems, but also things like interactive music and media. And I think it's really unusual we get him at this time because he's off and off at Ars Electronica, the premier new media festival in arts and science. And his work very much speaks to that humanist tone. He also, I was looking at his Instagram feed recently and saw him floating in kind of the vomit comet, so to speak, in zero G. And I think that's some of the work he's going to share with us today about being in zero gravity and also around sensory prosthetics. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Joe Paradiso.
Thanks a lot, Eric. It's great to be here at UC Berkeley. It's been a while since I've come by. I have so many friends here in the early days of sensor nets and embedded sensing. You had so many great pioneers here at Berkeley, and of course in the human-computer interface and all the great things you guys do in your department. And I've just been delighted to have had good friends in the area here in the department for so long. So it's just always wonderful to come back and see them. And I always like to say that UC Berkeley makes me feel like MIT in many ways. You just have that edge, right? At MIT, we pride ourselves on kind of having this radical edge, and it's there, especially at the Media Lab. We very much have it. But you got it here too. I spent the morning with Chris Pister, Dave Culler, and talking with you guys. You got that edge, and it's just great to see. So I always treasure my time here. So it's my privilege to be able to tell you guys about some of the stuff we're doing at the MIT Media Lab in my group. I'm going to go through lots of things. The generic theme will be how we connect to this world we're building after IoT. What ramifications it has is very, very difficult to quantify. As you know, the world changes in ways we can't always predict, but I'll try to give a few hints. And again, I'll be going very fast. If you guys want to get into any more details, you can always reach out to me or go to the site. We have a footprint for almost everything I'll talk about there. This is essentially what I'm going to talk about. I won't be able to get to all of it, I think, but I'll start with a bit of personal background, alluding to what Eric hinted at, some of why I do what I do. And then that's a natural bridge into some of the work we're doing in my group now in sound and audio. We've got a great audio group, embedded audio group in my team now. Talk a bit about smart buildings, wearables, and really no time to talk about smart tools and you guys work in that area, you know a lot of the work that we've been doing with augmented tools, robots in the hands, so I'm not going to cover that necessarily for time's sake. But a bit about Sensate Materials. I'm going to definitely try to treat generalization of presence and sensory augmentation, because I think that's something that is potentially transformative. And you'll see some of the work we're doing there. And if there's time at the end, I'll talk about some of the stuff we're doing in space, alluding to the ride in zero-G that Eric talked about. So again, I'm going to go over scales in the talk, stuff we're doing from on-body wearables all the way through building scale, landscapes, and space. This is my team. This is about 2 years ago. Students are on my lab space. Again, we have an electronics fabrication lab. We build lots of things ourselves, design and build circuitry of all sorts, sensors, embedded sensor systems. That's, again, one of the many residences I have with a lot of your faculty here. Actually, we may be tied for, if you look at the record for the most embedded sensor systems built per faculty, I think UC Berkeley, some of the teams here and my team are probably neck and neck for that prize. It's an honor to, again, talk to you about it. And this is just a couple months ago. So lots of visitors, people from all over. And again, as Eric alluded to, the people that come to my team, they're all solid engineers, or they have a science background, computation background. That's required to work in my group. But a lot of them are also artists or designers. It's so critical that they have this extra capability at the Media Lab. They can all talk to each other and work together. So it's a wonderfully diverse team of people from all over the place. So getting back to me, historical perspective. This is one of my early pictures at the science fair when I won in the 9th grade. I've been doing electronic sensors for a very long time, so it goes back a ways. You can see the old view of the space program back in the late 60s. But then music is the other huge force in my life. Those of you who know me well know that music is very, very important to me, and you'll see it come out in this talk in a few different ways. So these are both prime forces in my life ever since I can remember. Technology, sensors in particular, and music. The technology kind of won out early. This was my childhood hero. I don't know if any of you remember these books. Tom Swift, a kid growing up in the US that likes technology in the 60s. These are the adventure stories, very male-dominated. They have a lot of flaws, but again, always fantastic ideas. So this kind of started me out. I devoured this stuff, and it was just always fantastic. I loved especially the old series, though. This is stuff in the 60s, which now is dated. But the stuff that was written in the 1910s and 20s, it's so steampunk world that they didn't know was steampunk, right? This was cutting edge technology then. It's like a little barn in rural America that becomes a place for building Zeppelins. Just an incredible set of stories. A world that may have never existed, but to me it was very real and really magical. So of course I went on to do my PhD in high energy physics at MIT with Sam Ting's group. They won the Nobel Prize for discovery of the charm quark, the J-psi particle, just before I joined. So for me, that was obviously the group to join, and it was one of the best decisions I made in my life. Even though I'm not doing high energy physics now, the experience I had with that team, I think, was just fundamental, and they're still very, very close friends and even collaborators at some level now. This is an accelerator that doesn't exist anymore. It's in Hamburg, Germany, the Deutschen Elektronen Synchrotron. It was a E plus E minus collider to compete against the PEP collider that was at Stanford here around the same time. And we had an experiment there, which is the first one I worked on. Then I went to CERN to do my PhD. But there's that other force, the music force. And as a kid growing up in the 60s, that was the heyday of the large electronic music synthesizers, the modular synthesizers. So I was fascinated with the Moogs and the ARPs coming from the East Coast, New York for the Moogs, Boston actually for the ARPs, and out here with Don Buchla and the Buchla synthesizers. These to me were all, in the EMUs as well, also Dave Rossum from out in the West Coast. These were just all fascinating to me, right? As a kid that loved electronics, loved music, I wanted to have one. I couldn't afford to buy one because they were like already back then $10,000, way more than a kid could ever afford to buy in those days. So I decided to build one myself. So in 1975, I figured out what was in synthesizers more or less, learned electronics, and began to design and build my first synthesizers. This is the entire linear integrated circuit handbook from National Instruments back in those days. It was small. It's a different kind of a world. And now, yeah, what's a book, right? It's all online. We don't have these as real things anymore. Then I postdoced in Zurich after I built that first cabinet at ETH, building tracking detectors for E plus and minus collider at CERN at that time, the LEP collider. But after doing all my work during the day, I had to do something else at night. It takes a while to break into the social structure in Zurich. So during most of my 2 years, I had all these other ideas for electronic music, and that resulted in about another 80 modules. And at that point, I could have built a digital synthesizer. You can get a microprocessor, build a wave engine. I could have done it, and they started to appear on the market then. But it would have been obsolete as soon as I finished it. It wouldn't have done a thing until it was done. So I'm glad I didn't do it. There were lots of weird chips, including speech synthesizers that were coming out, weird logic chips I could coax into making some strange sound or music or doing some weird control. Ideas just kept coming, and I just kept building. So my evenings were totally full of designing and making these devices. I also started my deep addiction to records and music that blossomed into probably 10,000 CDs. I'm going to the Internet Archive tomorrow to visit my friend Bruce Turkala there who runs it. I donated all my CDs to them. So now one of the world's great prog rock collections is in the Internet Archive, in case you guys are interested. So this is what happened when I came home. This is my living room in the mid-1980s. I put everything in cabinets. All these synthesizers that I had bought before, they all couple into this main unit to umbilical. So it's one system, all controlled by patching. And this time, in a way, it was almost embarrassing to have a modular synthesizer because it was the time of the beginning of digital synthesis, and nobody cared about them. They were just throwing them away. It's a different world now. These modular synthesizers are something that people really want. And I think it's a deep question as to why. I had a great discussion with some of the HEI students about that this morning. It's the allure of patching, the physicality of having your hand on the sound. If you abstract to menus, abstract a set of screens on a computer, it's not the same. When you're physically there, see the modules in front of you, they suggest ideas, you have your hands on the connections, on the wires, on the knobs, very different feeling. So now there are more people making these than ever before. It's a huge industry. So this is my synthesizer set up in the MIT Museum in 2012. It streamed there live for every week I changed the patch. This is actual sound that was recorded from one of the patches. So it would be different every time. It's making its own music. I'm not playing it. I can play it if I want, but I like to build these massive algorithmic music processes in here. And it's all programmed by patching. I've got logic. The logic is all up here. So this is where the signals more or less come together. These are all analog and digital things scattered around to control or process sound in different ways. And it gets very, very complicated. This just keeps going on forever. This is a device that would allow people online to control a patch. So if I plug cords into here, there'd be voltages and gates that would appear on a website, and people could then go to the site and control. I had, during a week that it launched, it was blogged and wired. I had 50,000 people from around the world control it. We'd only let 20 on it once. We'd knock them off. They would compete with each other. Someone would move a knob one way, someone would move it the other way. So it was an intriguing bit of crowd psychology. There's a lot more if you go here, synth.media.mit.edu. I was invited to do an installation with this device just last summer for the 50th anniversary of the MIT CAVS, Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which was a real cutting-edge institution in technology and art, one of the very first, one of the most fundamental at a university. During the late 60s, it formed and went on for a couple of decades, became eventually ACT. But they invited me to do a synthesizer installation at the Plasma Fusion Center. So being a physicist, I asked them to give me data. This is data from MIT's tokamak, the Alcator CMOS, for a plasma fusion run where they had the largest recorded plasma pressure. And I just listened to the data, I played it back. This is intriguing. I can use these as sounds, I can use them as control waveforms. So I loaded them into a bunch of samplers that I had in my modular system. And it became a massive patch. So even I had no idea after a month exactly what it did. But it was very, very complicated. And it would just make stuff like this. So there's plasma sound all over this. There's the speech generator. So there's plasma sounds controlling Minsky Muse, actually. So one of the first algorithmic music machine designed by Marvin Minsky and Ed Fregman. That's in there, but it's being controlled by all the other modules. So it just keeps on going. Again, if you're interested, if you go to the website, you can hear more of this and lots of other stuff. My Bandcamp page will come. It's there somewhere. Not yet. And of course, this led to a whole lot of work in my team on musical controllers. When I went to the Media Lab in the beginning, I did a lot of work in HCI because they're new sensors to open up new kinds of interaction, but also we'd make music with almost everything we did. This is one of the world's first wearable wireless sensor nodes that we did for a dancer in 1997. 16 parameters on the foot, real-time broadcast from each foot to a base station, map it to music, the dancer would move. If this were a talk I'd give 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd show you more of this stuff. Learning by example. So complicated musical controller, we can't map them all by hand. Let's use machine learning already in 2004. Give examples. Play sound I want to control, listen to variations, move the controller, and then learn. We use dynamic time warping so we could map the two. And we built one of the first ones that you could do that with. Passive tag tracking. So just magnetic tags. We could actually look at their range, look at their angle, even deform them and see how the resonance changed. So this is a different kind of a controller. This is a piezoelectric carpet with, so you could walk on it, would see where you walk, how heavily you walk. But we had Doppler radars. We pulled features out of it. This is, before Google Solely, we would build the radars ourselves. They were a bit big back then, but we could look at motion features and then map that onto audio. Disposable wireless motion sensor, 2001, just minimal cost. A little piezoelectric accelerometer that would wake up a CMOS timer, give a 50 microsecond pulse of RF, and you could count the pulses if you had 200 of them in a crowd to get rhythm, to get the amount of activity. The batteries lasted until probably a few years ago. They just ran out of shelf life because it doesn't take any energy. This is a capacitive sensing chair where you sit in it, all your motion is tracked. This became a musical instrument, but then became a component in Honda cars to look at occupant position that basically was controlling airbag deployment. So lots of routes, but music controllers, at least at that time, were kind of the way I began a lot of these projects. And then we started the first musical instrument conference back then. I ran it from a Kai workshop a year before to a real conference in 2002 at our lab in Dublin, and now it's an institution. So 300-400 people come every year. It was just in Porto Alegre, Brazil. SIMAT used to be very involved. I used to love to always visit Dave Wessel when I was out here. I'm glad to hear that SIMAT is getting rebooted now. It's such a fantastic institution. But yeah, what you can do to control music is still a wide open story. Synthesis is pretty well nailed down, but the interface into it is still open, still not clear. There are things we can do, so it's an exciting time. This is a project that I did that kind of brought it all together. We started a collaboration with, I guess some of you recognize this, it's the Atlas detector at CERN. This is actually with the central detector out, this is the muon system around here. Huge superconducting magnet. These are all superconducting toroids here that bend the muons as they come out. And this is a human, that's a person. So the thing is massive. But I had friends still working there a few years ago, so I started a project with them to convert it into a audio source, to a musical instrument. So they gave me a subset of Atlas events. So every 15 seconds we get a new event from Atlas when it's running. And we built a framework for composers to build compositions on top of that data. So we made a piece ourselves, of course, but we just opened it up and had people all over do it. So the whole series of compositions ran on it. And again, we'd have the different subsystems, produce different kinds of features, different kinds of data, and presented it in a format where a musician would have the tools to map it into a composition. And we could run it on our platform. So CERN is still actually using this. This is a video. This is one of the pieces that we put together. So there's an event coming in here. And the sounds all depend on the multiplicity of different kinds of particles, different kinds of detections, in different parts of the detector. We did a live improv workshop at the Montreux Jazz Festival, so there was a real player who was being accompanied with sounds that came from the LHD. These are sounds that live in these little grains, and there's different detector elements get different kinds of hits. You fire the sound. This is just a simple Ableton interface, which is just a bunch of blocks you can customize. It's giving you kind of a minimalist soundtrack, but again, it's being driven by the events. You have a different event, loads up different parameters, it'll sound different. So once the beams come back at CERN, they'll have new compositions running from composers that have submitted pieces, and they still run it, I think, on cache data. And my student Juliana, who did that work, went on to do applied sonification. The inspiration was kind of think about a rotation, where if you have your eyes where they're best, looking at data visually, you can have other aspects of the data on audio and then be able to rotate back and forth. Rotation is a vague term, but we found different ways of having a smooth mapping from visual to audio with a toolkit for sonification. And again, trying to look at functional sonification. There's no time to show you the details, but there's again a whole lot to do, and we don't really know how to do that well. We've made a stab, but trying to use the ears where they're best, use the eyes where they're best, and be able to rotate smoothly and move between domains. I think it's an intriguing area, and we're on the verge of, I think, doing great things there. So my group is working a lot now on cognitive audio. I've got a bunch of students that know quite a bit now about machine learning, and it's common among all departments. But also they're audio experts. They know about signal processing and audio, and looking at intersections between them, especially thinking about building devices that can hear not perceptually like we do, the way audio codecs work, but also cognitively. What's memorial about sounds? If you want to pick sounds people remember to compress your day, how would you do it? So they've been building models of this. I'll let Ashwarya tell you here.
If you're at a crowded party and someone behind you says your name, you will notice and pay attention to it, even though you wouldn't be able to recall any other words that person might just have said. This demonstrates something really amazing about our cognition. The lowest level of subconscious perception actually relies on high-level gestalt meaning in the sounds we hear to filter and extract sound objects before they reach our conscious attention and memory.
In this project, we use machine learning to characterize some of these high-level features of the sound as a tool to create summaries of long environmental recordings. We expose the controls for these cognitive features to sound designers so that they can choose summaries that highlight relaxing or distracting snippets, novel and memorable sound events, or common and unexciting ones. These principles form the building blocks to begin to understand and model how sounds interact with our attention and our memory. These models will one day form the basis for sound compression, rendering optimization, and user experience design.
I'll talk about our Tidmarsh project at the end of the talk, where we have microphones all over a restored wetland to really measure natural sounds at different scales and different kinds of microenvironments. But one of the big things that we're intrigued with is trying to develop a model that gives you the gist of what's happening in a space. You should get the sounds that more or less are happening there, but without repeating, without being the actual samples or sounds. So ways of trying to sample the essence of an environment so we can bring it back in a way that's just not simple and repeating. And that way, again, with our Tidmarsh environment, we bring it to a virtual world. We can give you the essence of it without having to play back clips that could repeat or may not go together well, and then pull out the foreground from the background sounds, the sounds you'd notice, and then resynthesize those at a location so that you don't get echo and slap back from just adding mics together. You're resynthesizing it and dropping it in where it's supposed to be in the virtual world. So lots of places this can go. Ashwarya also has worked with notification environments. This is something that she presented, I think, at CHI or one of the CHI conferences. We all have music streams everywhere, right? We're listening to them personally. We even go into a restaurant, we're hearing music. What if the music could change in subtle ways to give us a notification? Right now you get a notification, it's a bing, or it's something everybody notices. What if you could do it in a personalized and subtle way? So she produced a framework to do this. And this is her example. Whoa. I'm glad this is close. So that's what it's like now. And it's never pleasant. But now she has some examples. So there, if you know the piece, it's a harmonization that shouldn't be there. It's subtle. This is even more subtle. See if you can hear it. She speeds it up, just a little, but enough for her to notice. So here's a blues piece. Extra beat. Again, subtle, but if she knows the music, she'll hear it. Here's a great one. So the message comes in, it's not that important. A little bit of detuning, but she notices it. The message is more important. Here it comes. More detuning. So it's a continuum. You can play with it. So this whole audio environment is plastic, right? It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. We can start getting into it and working with it. This is essentially the cornerstone slide of everything I'm going to show from here on. And it's a slide I've had in my deck now for, 10, 15 years. And at one point it was radical, but now it's the way life is. I had this conversation with so many of you here. I mean, there are sensors in everything. They've been in everything for a long time because they follow corollaries of Moore's law. Now they all communicate. They all want to talk back, at least most of them do. And so the future lies in trying to put all this data together, and you have to develop frameworks that are transparent across them. We developed our own called Chain to do this a few years ago, but now there are so many frameworks you can start to use. The world gets it. This is happening. It has tremendous implications for privacy and security, which you have authorities here, and we can have endless discussions about this. It's so important, but it's happening. The world is transitioning. The uniqueness of any device is now a very limited thing. They're melding. So this is the world that we live in now, at the beginning of this, right? It's what Nicholas Negroponte, our founding director, called the digital butler. He used to have butlers in his life. And the butler you talk to and you give instructions, mainly with a voice channel, and maybe recognizes some things about you. But the voice channel is not the right way to interact with this world. I don't want to have to tell it all the time what I want to do, right? A good butler will anticipate what you want before it happens, ideally, right? And this is, again, the future of IoT, and we already see the beginning of it. These sensor values build models of us. These models are used to be predictive, and things start happening without us necessarily telling us. It's essentially a blurring of the sense of self. As I said in the abstract for the talk, the boundaries of self aren't anymore so much at my skin. It's bleeding out into the cloud, right? These environments are acting as to some extent prosthetics, as assistants, as part of me, part of my body, extensions. And the next projects are about that. So this is a project we did a long time ago, 2010. Our first smart building project started a couple of years earlier. It was done by Mark Feldmeyer, collaborator for Wearable from way back, and electronics legend at MIT, one of our best hackers. He built a wristband back before you really had them on the market so much. They could run on micropower. We use the analog accelerometer, the kind that disk drives use if they're falling to pull the heads back. It's just a cantilever, piezo ceramic, very, very cheap. With micropower filters we built ourselves to be able to, and envelope followers to amplify and filter and detect the signal if you're moving. So we get motion from it, see how you're moving, activity. So we had an activity monitor that ran at microwatts already back then. And then we measured temperature, humidity, know more or less the location, what office you're in, just from the radios. We had radios in every office, and with the metal studs, that was enough to tell essentially what office you were in. And then you would label it if you were hot or cold. We had buttons, and that was kind of critical. It would control the HVAC, because we had retrofits in all the rooms for the HVAC, but didn't control off temperature at the wrist. It would control off of inferred comfort, because you labeled the data. Use all the sensor data and use the labeling that you would make at the wrist. So everybody got a switch curve. This is an example here. The person was too hot. Here they were too cold. Separates almost trivially with a straight line in enthalpy space, temperature, humidity, and of course you can use activity level and other things in the inference. He used nearest neighbor actually to do the classification here. And then we ran it over a summer at MIT when the conditions were relatively uniform. We used less energy, so less chilled air. We inferred energy use from chilled air, but we're more comfortable. So before we ran it, nobody is ever that comfortable in their office. It's usually too cool or it's just not right. Afterward, people are much happier. At least with our limited study, it looks like it could work. So this more or less, it's not just the thermostat on the wall, even though our thermostat is smart. It's not using the wearable to see if you're home or not. It's really inferring comfort from the wearable and in situ measurements and using the comfort model to drive the HVAC. And a lot of our work went on to lighting. So we're still working in the area of at least broad area, what you would call lighting. And it was motivated not just by advances in technology and that lighting is networked and controllable. It's also that in our building, which 8 years ago was a new building, we couldn't turn on the lights. This is the controller. It's a Lutron controller. The bottom button turned them off, but this is like a fuse box metaphor. We had some sliders for lights you couldn't even see, and then you'd write some preset and record it at a button like a radio dial. I mean, this is not the right interface for lighting. And of course, you can have web controllers, but then you have to look at your phone. You want lighting to decide more or less what to do by itself as much as possible. So the first thing we did already in 2010 was to make a sensor that could identify different amounts of light that came from different fixtures. So you can modulate fixtures. They're modulated anyway in a solid state light. Even fluorescent lights are modulated. They can even have their own signature. You can pull apart how much light comes from different fixtures by looking at how much light comes at a given modulation on the sensor. And then those are activity vectors for a linear program that can optimize. You just set it up with an objective to minimize the current in the light, and it just sets up naturally as a linear program. And you can use this as your light switch anywhere that will energy optimally give you the light at that point. But yeah, why not look at light that's coming into your eyes instead of light on a surface? So we started working with wearables. So Nan has been wearing a camera in my group now for, probably a decade. and when she was doing her diploma with us from Aachen, she was living with us and doing all this work. So we could, look at the light that's reflected back and adjust it. But of course, after a few years of that, Nan didn't have to make her camera anymore. She could just wear Google Glass, because that's got sensors in it, that's got a camera. So we got glass and we all play with it, right? So we started using it with lighting. And Nan built a whole environment with using the sensors in glass. So here she is in our lighting lab. We've got an agile lighting system in there, Philips lighting system. And as she's moving around, it's seeing how much light comes into her eyes, and it's adapting it. So she's always getting the same amount of light back. So that's relatively straightforward. But there are other sensors. She's on a phone call. It recognizes that. It brings the room into an environment that's better for social interaction, a warmer light. So it's still saving energy, but it's moving it to a warmer spectrum because she's social. Now she goes back to work. It senses that. It fades into a context that's better for focus. And then a friend comes to visit. Most of my students at that time were musicians, and it goes into a warm tone. You're not telling it what to do. The context model is basically driving the lights. The light switch is off-sourced into the context. You can always grab her phone and then override it in different ways with a controller, but there's a lot you can do just with the sensors. But this went further. We thought about the environments of the future. Okay, you've got large projection screens, large TVs, eventually we'll have smart wallpaper. What about bringing the essence of a room or a different space into your area? So can I bring the essence of a library into my area if I want to focus? Can I bring an outdoor setting into my area if I want to relax? Can I work with these and change the lighting, but also change physically what I see? So we built a projection screen, integrated with the lighting so it all changed together in one continuous system. But we didn't just change it on demand to something. No, we could. We even had a voice interface saying, find me a woodland setting, and it would. We servoed it with wearables because the room could see how you responded to it. The room could see if you're getting more relaxed, if you're getting more focused by how your behavior was changing, how you were attending to what you had in front of you, a whole bunch of different features, and it would use those to control. So we had heart rate variability, we had motion sensors, we had a chest strap actually in the earlier work to get access to EKG. We would look at facial expression and facial direction, gaze direction, more critical, and fuse that all together, use that to control the room. So this is a video that starts out conceptually with the students. This is somebody who has time on their hands. So they're enjoying themselves at work, but now they have things to do. So they get stressed out a little bit. They have more work dumped on them. We've all had days like this. So be stressed. But the soft sensors recognize that state. They see his galvanic skin response change, heart rate variability, heart rate, so on and so forth. So it transforms to a setting that for him is more restorative, which is the woodland setting. And he starts looking at his work, gets more into control. The sensors kind of figure that out from his gaze direction, from his bioparameters, and brings it into a setting that's better for flow, which for him is a library. So the room is his partner. It's basically is serving itself to bring him into that state. That was open loop. Now it's closed loop. This is actually work of a year ago. This is her current state. This is where she wants to be. This is what's projected now. It reweights it in a restoration focus space. And if it diverges too much, it will change the image. It's basically servoing it kind of like a deadband controller to bring the two states together. So it's looking at how you react. It's learning a personalized model from how you're reacting to the environment. We've made it portable since. This is a portable version. We work with steel case. We even have scent output as well. We can make it hotter or colder. We've got actually a low-res display to look at more abstract visuals. It's like a little like a frosted window. And we have a thermal camera to look at cognitive load. We've done a lot of work basing it stuff on the work going on at UW and other places, looking at temperature in the nose and the forehead. And again, you can bring it anywhere. It's portable. Working a lot with steel case and furniture companies that are at the Media Lab on rolling this out. And then we're thinking about other ideas in the space. One of my students is fascinated with learning, because if you want to learn, you want the environment in which you're learning to be optimal for you to learn. Could be on the go, so the right information comes to you in the right time. Could be when you're sitting down. So trying to use this for learning. There's so many places, creative spaces as well, right? If I want to be in a creative mood, I like a junky stock room. I like mess, because that gives me ideas. Once I start refining the ideas, I want nothing on the table. I just want to have a clean slate. So this kind of environment can do that. It's lots of places that we can push it. My students are also fascinated with attention. And I had a subgroup. We actually run a course in Shenzhen about manufacturing at scale every year. Bunny Huang, some of you know him. He's kind of a legend in the fab space and computer space. He runs it. And they're developing a pair of glasses that have sensors on them to really measure attention. Low-cost sensors, simple things. We can track them accurately to know where they are. We can look at how much attention you're paying, where you're looking, all of these various things. So it's evolving. I can't say very much now because it's still being finalized. But we want to make 80 or 100 of them. And some of the big meetings we have at the Media Lab, give them to lots of people, get some data, do some demos. But the guys want to do an event. So you have a big media event, a concert, something like that. Use the feedback of how people are paying attention somehow in the production of the content. So I think as a research tool, it's intriguing because attention is the next battle to be fought out in the real world. It's fought out now in web pages and virtual environments. It will also come into the real space. Can we take control of attention ourselves? Big question. Do we even know with a simple device what we're paying attention to? This will begin to look at that. And yeah, we're going to build a whole bunch of projects on top of platforms like this. So that gets us into wearables. The Media Lab, as you know, is one of the pioneering institutions in wearable computing. This is a picture from 1995. The people are already living the dream. I'm sure you know both of these guys at the end. You probably know some of the others. But this is Thad Starner, who basically is one of the main drivers behind Google Glass. He's at Georgia Tech and still spends time at Google. A very good friend of many of us. And also over here, Steve Mann, another visionary, more everywhere augmented reality. Went to Toronto, has a whole set of wearable acolytes that have come out of his group there. So they haven't given up, but the world has changed a lot. But wearables have been in our blood. I've been doing wearables since roughly that time, more wearable sensing. This is a project we did after we did the shoe for the dancer. We built a device to measure very high dynamic range activity. I got to know the doctors that do sports medicine for a very famous Boston sports team. I forgot to blank it out here, but you can guess who they are. So we go down to spring training every year. We built a multi-point sensor node. We put it on various parts of the body. You can see it the palm, over here on the arm, on the chest, on the shoulder. We could even put it on the bat. And they'd swing, they'd pitch, they'd do all these various things. And we had a dual range IMU. Actually, I ultimately want a log IMU. At this point, I don't think you can get one. They may not even make one.
What's that acronym?
Inertial measurement unit. So we have accelerometers, gyros, and even magnetometers now. So you can basically look at all the motion characteristics and even begin to track with it. So we built a high-rate network, high-rate TDMA network. You couldn't buy one back then. We had to make it ourselves with a Nordic radio. So everybody would synchronize with the radio, then they'd transmit back. Then we stopped transmitting back and just recorded to flash. And we get the data back. And we can analyze it after. We actually just put out, we did the project starting in 2006 to 2012. You start to get products in this space just now, although I think the range and the bandwidth of what we had here is still in a unique place. With the last paper came out of the collaboration. Finally, it all kind of squeaks out at this later date. But again, it's incredible. Look at what he's doing. He's pitching at over 120 Gs per second, over 120 Gs peak. Was it 3,000 degrees per second? Just incredible bursts of activity these guys can do. And again, quantifying it, building predictive models to try to predict joint damage and things like that. And we see intriguing hints of something like jerk, right? It's the derivative of acceleration, which is intriguing. The way it's changing could play a major role in trauma. So lots of windows this can give you that optical trackers can't. One of my students at the time, Namwei Gong, has become an entrepreneur, a pretty successful one at this point. She started a company in Boston recently called Figure 8, which makes a system like this, not nearly the wide range we have. It's more oriented toward physical therapy and training, but it's got a Bluetooth BLE IMU, again, the accelerometers, magnetometer, and gyro, but it's got a flexible goniometer on it as well. So it looks at joint bending. At this point, you can get these elastomeric fabrics, which really can measure stress or stretch and strain very, very well. And they're not hysteretic. They go back to where they start. And she's built a product around it, working now with sports teams and therapy institutes. But I had the opportunity to wear it in, as Eric hinted, in 0G. I'm the faculty advisor to our space initiative, student-run space initiative. Every year we do a 0G flight. So just last month, I figured if I'm going to go there, I don't want to just hang around. I'm going to wear sensors. So I wore Namwei's sensors. But the beauty of them is that there's a reason, because people try to exercise physiology in space. There's actually even a group from our air astro department that had accelerometers and IMUs strapped on the joints, and they want to look at the difference in the readings to get the joint angle. Now, you can't do that in 0G because it's 0G. This is 0G over here and here. These are all the different parabolas. The actual data, I put this together with the slide on the plane together. I just got the data, took out Excel, and figured I'd analyze it. 0G is 0G. Here you see tilt. This is a hypergravity. When you're coming out, you're laying down, and the plane is getting up to its next parabola. The 0G is 0. You don't get tilt, right? So the accelerometers don't work for tilt the way they do on normal goniometers. You can use the gyros and integrate them. Those drift. You can't use a magnetic field to null it out, really, because the plane is always changing heading, spacecraft change heading. So the goniometer works beautifully, right? It's a little noisy. I have to really look at the data, but you can see in the 0G areas, I'm flailing. That's what these spikes are. I'm definitely flailing. That's what you do. But you can see the joint angles. It's coming through. So the goniometer works very well in this space application. We've done a lot of work in my group to look at finger motion from the wrist, sense of the wrist, see what the fingers are doing. Lots of different projects. I'll talk about a few of them. This is something called the wrist K. This is around 2012, I think.
The future of home technology is
This is when a
jewelry. Well, sort of.
home garden
In the
TV
future,
group
you're gonna
came.
be able to control and monitor everything in your home.
So this is
wearing
a
bracelet like this.
wristband that
I'm
looks a little
assuming
bit
there's
like
something very
a
smart
shackle,
going on
but
inside
it
here.
works.
We're
We're going to be getting Qualcomm's UWB ultra wideband location, the Peanut. I think some of you guys may play with that. But they didn't have it,
I
so we
turned
used
them
Ubisense.
Okay, this is amazing.
But yeah, it knows where
How is
you
this
are.
working?
From the
This
IMU
is
knows where you're
tracking motion
pointing,
of
so
your
you can
wrist.
actually point and
You
gesture.
move around using the same
Just
sensor
using that.
that
You have to
you
know
find
the
on your
magnetic
cell phone
field,
and video
magnetometer,
game
play
control.
some
Right,
games
cell phones
orientation,
sort
but
of
we know how to
whether
do
they're
that.
tilted. If that's not a home
So you
of the
have
future, I don't
pointing
know
as
what
being
is. And this is also going to help me control the temperature in the
an
room as well,
interaction.
right?
Oh yeah, we have a bunch of sensors in there.
I
that
put
are
in the
referring
smart
to your
HVAC
personal
sensors.
temperature, how much you're moving, humidity.
So it's not just if the room's hot, it's if I'm hot.
Yes, and as you move around, it tracks you and it controls your environment where you are, not across the whole house.
I would imagine that it's also going to save me a lot of money too, because the thermostat's going to be heating just enough to make me comfortable and no more. What's it going to control next?
It doesn't have to be just lights. You can point to your TV and gesture to change channels. You point to your stereo to change the tracks, change the volume, gesturing in different ways. Maybe point at the dishwasher and it will start.
I wonder if I just point at my husband if he'll take out the trash.
She didn't like my answer.
All the comforts at home with a...
And pointing isn't, a panacea, but it's intriguing. This is a system we developed, which is a wristband that measures the tendon deformation. So it's a pressure measuring wristband. This is a project done by Artem Demetiev in my group. And he used machine learning, so he basically just trained it. You put it on, you give sample gestures, and it can measure what you hold, because the wrist, of course, deforms when you hold things. We all know that. So it's one of the things you can train it to do. Or you can recognize the different gestures, as I showed. Here's a very low power wake up gesture. So this is unambiguous. You can sample a low duty cycle, always detect that. Of course, this is a Chi paper. We had to control something, we controlled lights. We had a lot of controllable lights in our group. This is my favorite. You get this more or less for free. You measure the strain on the tendons when you pull the brake, and you can flash the warning light. This is a project we did with Cindy Cow, who now I think is at Cornell, I believe, and Chris Schmann's group. This is a project of Artem's. It's essentially a touchpad for the fingernail, Bluetooth touchpad just on a fake fingernail, very small. So it works, it's the raw data. And if you centroid on that, it's quite accurate. So he's got a lot of examples of hands-free things where you can hold something in the hand and still use it as a control. Usually if something is on you, it's especially something that is attached to you on its own accord, it's not a good thing. But what if it is? And that launched a whole line of inquiry into my group already. We thought about this whole idea. We did a lot of early work in energy harvesting. Some of you know it. I actually used to talk with the Berkeley guys quite a bit because there's a big theme here for a long time. Still is, I think, in some places. But I was at a meeting. I think it was one of the big meetings we had at UCLA, a sensor network meeting down there. A bunch of us were there. And they were talking about mobility and trying to harvest energy from mobility. I thought, well, if you have a solar cell and you're on Mars, or Clean View, you can make a little robot move or something, right? You can play with that. But otherwise, it costs a lot of energy to move bits. Usually we just move photons. It's so much easier, right? Send a message. But what if you could harvest mobility? So you have small agents that can hop onto something that's bigger and then hop off somewhere else. And that intrigued me. So that I brought it back to the group and we started a whole project around that. So the one on the right is based on an active attachment like a flea or a tick, although those also harvest energy from the host, which we don't really do here. So it's hopping a ride. It goes to some place that may be better. It's looking for light actually here, and then it'll hop off. So it's a proof of concept. You'd have some work, but in principle it shows it. This is one based on a burr, so it sticks. So Tara sits down in her chair, and now she's unwittingly moving the sensor because it attaches, the silicone adhesive attaches to the last thing it sees. And then she goes back to her office. It'll reattach to the chair. So she has moved the node. But those nodes can actuate too. They have pager motors in them. They have a whole lot of sensors too. They have radio. So now when it sees light, it actuates and it falls off. So we thought also of symbiotes too, symbiotic nodes like pens. Pens have advertisement because we know they travel through social networks, right? What if you think of a piece of electronics? And I'm sure there are examples already now of that. Time has marched on. That you can just dispose, you don't need it, but someone else will pick it up because it's useful. So electronics can find their own way through social infrastructures physically because people want to take them. So there are lots of ways you can play with this. I think this is a Black Mirror theme of some sort, probably already has been made into something. And then we got into robots on the body. I was inspired by actually the Intel selfie drone. I went to visit some of the guys down at Intel in Santa Clara, and we had some great discussions. They had sponsored the contest that the selfie drone won. And it was conceptual, it was a design study. But the drone is here, and you go there, and it goes off, takes a picture, comes back. Wonderful idea. Okay, let's think about what we can do with things that move around the body. So my student Artem, together with Cindy and Sean Fulmer down at Stanford, he was a student at the lab, were thinking about wearables that will move to where they're best located on the body, so the dynamic wearables. So this is the video that we showed at Ars Electronica. Some of you actually know this. So here's where they want to be for motion tracking. Here's the display going to where it would work maybe as a watch. Here, the display needs more space, so it finds one of its partners. I don't know what this is, some notification device or something. This is Cindy's work, it's beautiful stuff. It's jewelry that can move, but it's also functional in that if you get a call, that's now the microphone.
Incoming call. Leonardo DiCaprio. Hey, Cindy Cow.
Yo, what's up?
So Artem did a lot of work also, not just designing and building a micro robot, how to track it, how to navigate on clothing, a whole lot of work behind that part. But now, for his PhD, he has just finished robots that crawl on skin. I didn't know what robables were good for, crawling on clothing. Obviously some stuff, but what about a robot that can crawl on the skin? Because you can start to think of medical operations, you can think of medical tests where you don't have the gantry robot. So you just let these things loose and they crawl around and do stuff and measure stuff. So it has a camera on it, has a lot of sensors. The one on the right is pneumatic. It even has a version that doesn't need a tether that can still attach. They navigate with tattoos that you can put on. The camera can see them. These are different kinds of soft robots he's played with to try to do it. He measures lots of things. This is his durometer test. He has a whole durometer map now. It's one thing you can do with it. You grab, you push, you can measure skin rigidity and make a whole map of it as you move across the skin. So he's got a map of his skin elasticities from his little robot. And my group too, we've been thinking about what we call sensei media, where you make a material that's like a sensor net, but now the nodes are millimeters apart, right? So you make sensei nodes you embed into a substrate. So we have lots of examples of that. This is a floor that we made at Microsoft Research, actually when we were there for a summer, that essentially measures every kind of electromagnetic signal from GSM phones, capacitive, passive, and active. It had little microphones or piezoelectric microphones on each node. So we could see when people were walking acoustically as well. It would do near field coupling and it would form a network. So you just connect at the end and just roll this out. And again, the substrate is all printed. And then my students did guitars. They're like instruments. This is all a touch surface for a guitar that you print. Yeah, there's more, but I'll jump to the last part since I'm getting a little bit later. This is the other area that really has been fascinating me in the group the last years. And we did the cover article of Scientific American a few years ago. Some of you may have seen it on the idea, and we started doing the work. The whole idea of telling into the information coming from sensors that are everywhere. I was at a workshop actually, I think with Dave Culler, Deborah Esther, and a bunch of us were in Finland, way in Lapland. And we're all thinking about sensor nets and how they meet mobile devices and things. And at that point, I thought, well, it's all perception. Can I get all this information from sensors and funnel it into my perception in a very seamless way? Can I extend my perception in a natural way with all the sensors that are everywhere? So I brought that back to the group. We did a bunch of work, and eventually it got to the point where we looked at virtual worlds that were driven by sensor information in the real world. We called them cross-reality environments. So this is, for instance, the Media Lab now. If you go and visit us, a beautiful glass building. What if you could look through and not just see the lights through the glass, but see the sensor information? So we built CAD models that are basically driven by this already 10 years ago. It's now digital twin comes. It starts getting to be better known, but we were doing it then. Normally I'd run it, but the servers are all old and our links to the different data sources are down, but this is a video. These are the sensors being animated. The HVAC in every room is the sphere. This is the temperature in the atrium. You have sensors out there. If it's redder, it's hotter. Blue is cooler. If there's an arrow, temperature is going up or down. These are motion sensors in the public areas. This is RFID. Somebody walked by. We have the picture. We can show it. And we have audio. You can hear. There are microphones here. If you get near in the virtual world where there's a microphone in the real world, you can hear the microphone. But you can't snoop. And these are people speaking English. So you can't understand. But you get the affect. Somebody laughs, they're happy, but you have no idea what they're talking about. We delete grains, we drop grains, reverse them, and then we smooth it so it sounds more natural. So it's almost like being in a weird dream, right? That you're connected to this space, but you can't snoop. Yeah, so after one of our conferences, people get kind of mob it. There's Nicholas showing up here at the end. He was there. This is a day passing just in seconds. So you see all the HVAC come out of setback, the atrium dries out, it gets bluer, the humidity goes down, and then people start showing up. We thought next about what about doing this at a planetary scale, right? Actually, you guys here at Berkeley and sensor nets are coming from the West Coast. We're all working in outdoor environments. I was working indoors. We kind of swapped. I started working outdoors. One of our retired faculty colleagues co-owns a large cranberry bog, 600, 800 acres in Plymouth, about an hour drive south. And she gave it to Mass Audubon, to the state, to be restored. It was the largest restoration project on the east coast of the US. It was a huge wetland restoration project. And wetlands are much better for environments than cranberry bogs, right? They're all got fertilizer. Nothing really grows. If they go naturally restored, it takes decades. If you go in and bulldoze it, open up the old water channels, let the sand move, put in some wood to trap water in different ways, it comes back much faster and much stronger. So we figured we'll put in sensors to document that, and at the same token, try to connect the sensors to people in different ways. So it was a cranberry bog. It's in Plymouth down here. This is the site where they opened up all the stream beds. This is what it looked like after they had bulldozed it, basically to reset the environment away from the cranberry bog, open up the stream channels. Just a couple of years later, it looked like this. So it's already made quite a recovery. So we want to put our sensors out. We designed and built them for that purpose. And how do we connect them to people in different ways? The critical thing. So we built a low power sensor. This is the last version that we made. It's got a little solar cell on the top. It gets enough sun for part of the day. It can run. It has no problem. Charges up. We did our own variant of ZigBee low power networking protocol so we could get the data off the node. It would update twice a minute, 3 times a minute. Lots of sensors we could plug in. Microphones all over too. The microphones at this point are wired, and unfortunately critters like to chew them. We love the synchronization because we're doing localization, lots of other things with the signals. Although we have a wireless architecture that will work for that will evolve too. Cameras as well now. Network, again, is our own. This is one of the base stations. Base stations have either solar power or can be wired depending on where they are. And then in this horrible muck, we can put our sensors. And we, at one point, had only 4 locations, and we'd be able to build our low-power network around them, the directional Wi-Fi to a hub. Now we have more. And the sensors are expandable. This is a wetland. We want to put sensors down into the ground. That's the sensor diagram of all of the thing. Lots of different kinds of sensors on it, but again, we can critically add whatever we want. And again, we want to measure the soil. So that's one in the ground with soil probes. We have many. We have an app when we install it. It takes just a minute or two to put a sensor in, calibrate it, and get the location and it logs. We built 300 of them. That's my lab, we're rolling them out. And again, they're in all kinds of environments at Tidmarsh. This is a transect. So we have many different places where we're different kinds of geometries. This is a line going across the property to look at microtopography and how hydration and properties change. So we can go to the web to look at it, and I'll do that very quickly. So if we go to Tidmarsh, this should work. Yeah, here we go. So this is Plymouth now. And of course, when we first did this some years ago, it was shocking. Now my doorbell can do it. It's dark over there. And yeah, there's critters. So that's a cricket or something. And then you look at the sensor data. This is temperature, humidity of all the sensors in this region here. You can look at light levels. So we look at different spectral bands. So you can see what this day was like, relatively clear. And we can look at the soil. So this is the hydration at different levels. Soil temperature, you're seeing diurnal variation. If they're deeper, you don't see as much. So it depends on where they are. That's live. That's Plymouth now. It's darker there. It's getting dark now in the East Coast, as it is here. This is another location. Again, live audio from each. This is another one. It's dark. This is the transect. There's no visual from this now, but you can see when we when we make them, they appear on a map. So that's a straight line. But even better than that, we can bring the information to a virtual world. So we can run a virtual environment written in Unity. We laser scan the topography. We can go there now and have the sensor data tunnel through. And we map the sensor data not only onto visuals, but we map it also onto music. So we built a framework like we did with the LHC. So composers can author pieces on the sensor data. So this is a piece that we did with Evan Zaporin. He's a composer at MIT. That's a node updating. This is all real-time data. So I can look at different data from the nodes. And it's spatialized. So as I move, you can see it change. This should be changing. And there are animals here. You should toggle on the animals. There they are. We made them look like ghosts. The animals feed on the sensor data, and depending on what the data is, they change their appearance over a period of time. So it's been dry. The animals are kind of shaggy. They have a bad hair day. They can change their color with temperature, things like that. So the history of the sensor data is reflected in the animal that you see. And of course, I don't like the music. I can change it. This is kind of a bunch of blues loops that plays, and depending on what the weather's like, it'll change. This is a new agey piece. Every time a sensor updates, you'll hear a little ping. And the timbre and the pitch depends on temperature and humidity. And if I go up to the base station, this is what one of the things called augmented virtuality. Again, I'm not a gamer, but I'll get up there. It's right here. Here is a view. Of course, it's dark, but you should be seeing the camera here. Yeah, we're looking into the real world over here. And you can look at data if you want to. Anyway, so I'm almost done. Only one last thing to show. I'm going to show you the video of the animals. You'll need to see that. With all the audio, too, we go into a machine learning backend, and we can identify in real time different kinds of animals, different kinds of environmental sounds, airplanes, all of this from all the mics, and more or less locate them. Actually, now we're using time of arrival. We're going to be able to do a better job. There's a video. No time for the video. I would even run it in real time. We can run this. We go to tidzam.mit.edu. You can try it. This is, for instance, looking at different kinds of sounds. So the spring peepers at night, the birds during the morning and the afternoon, airplanes when they come over, so on and so forth. If you drill down to the bird species, you can see the different species coming in at different times. Actually, we're now beginning to, this is about 80% Audubon capability. It's not quite at the classification level a birder can do, but it's not terrible. It's getting better and better the more it trains. So we're going to actually do longitudinal studies now, run over the years we've had audio data, and actually see if we can start to see differences in what happens with the species. And we can run recognition in the video. This basically will show that. This is an app that our French team has done. This is the last thing I'm going to show. What if you're really there, physically in the space? So everything I've shown you is remote. We poked into the sensor network from Berkeley, and we've taken a little visit to Plymouth. But if you're physically on the site, can we augment your perception in a graceful way with all the data? In this case, especially with the audio, we have microphones all over the place in parts of the property, and the sensors themselves can generate audio. So we built a set of bone conduction headphones with trackers to see where you're looking. This is the first version here. So this is the headphones. You have a little touch interface if you want to zoom in. And we want to look at attention. So if you're focusing on something, zoom in to what's more or less ahead of you automatically, right? So a way of naturally zooming perception. This was a pain to wear. Eye trackers, pupil diameter, EEG, all this stuff. And the young Gershon didn't need it. The really critical thing was the IMU, because when you tend to focus on something, you're just looking straight ahead. Just simple device, bone conduction, head tracking, looking at stillness, completely transforms the way you perceive an environment. And I had the experience, okay, granted it's my student, and at first I was working on it, it was problem, this and that, and it's wrong. In the end, it was such an experience to walk through and hear through microphones that are deep in the swamp, to hear sounds I could never hear, but hear them as if it's coming from my ears. And because it's not covering your ears, it's a totally different sensation, right? It's not a set of headphones. You still can hear, but you're being augmented through the bone conduction with all these other channels. You can even walk through in the winter and experience it in the spring. And when I did that, I didn't want to take it off. Even when I was listening to the sounds in the winter, it was still great to hear the wind, to hear these things from far away. Like when you have your ears cleared out, you hear a whole different world, right? It was just an amazing feeling. So there's something about taking the sensor data and putting it into our perception in the right way. This is hitting it at something that's intriguing. This is a video of people that we worked with to test it. This is Dan from Bose. He's designed every headphone we've ever done. And for him, it was a very new kind of experience.
As I move my head,
this is a naturalist we work with.
I go from hearing the tree birds, and now I'm hearing more ducks and geese and froggy frogs. And I put on my supersonic beam action. And now that's really all I'm getting. And now all I'm getting is the forest because I just moved my head this way. I can really hone in. There must be one right there.
This woman coming up is a naturalist who's a Luddite. So she just bought a cell phone, I guess, a month before this. But for her, this is a very different experience.
I don't know, when I walk through the woods, I think I'm looking first and I'm listening second. So this is this is bringing listening. This is really cool.
So I'm just.
So it gives people a lot of ideas. Dan's thinking about different ways you can use it. He's an engineer, of course, working for an audio company. So there's potential here. Okay, I had a previous life doing spacecraft. We do a lot of work in space. We have a space initiative. I have no time. Lots of different projects. One of my students is doing self-assembling spacecraft, thinking about having them come together with magnets, actually, in her case. So she has little sensor nodes she's built on them as well. That's me meditating in zero-G with karmic levitation. If you have zero-G flight, it's really easy to levitate, by the way. I didn't get karma, but I got levitation. And on the zero-G flight, it was wonderful to see all the experiments. But in her case, you really could see these structures begin to come together and assemble passively. So that's a quasi-crystal. But over time, that would shake loose and it would work. How you scale is another issue. But she's done suborbital flights. We have, periodically we rent a rocket from Blue Origin to get free space and build sensor nodes on units. In her case, they can look at it coming together. This is another project with grappling onto asteroid. My students wanted to make nets that could grapple onto an asteroid. We didn't think there was anything on an asteroid to grapple onto but dust. But we know now they're rocky, right? There's a lot of rock. You might lift them off if you have a net. You grapple in many places. I'm going to be at JPL next week talking about stuff like this. You can begin to hold on. And then you have the net, you have little robots that can go back and forth. And then we're thinking about textiles for space. This is going to be Juliana's PhD thesis. Thinking about weaves. Now everything's covered with cloth and spacecraft for thermal protection and protection against micrometeorites. Weave it out of a sensei fabric. So you can actually sense the micrometeorite impacts, look at their intensity, look at the momentum transfer, but also try to characterize them. Because they give a plasma discharge if they have high enough intensity. And that plasma discharge is get some indication of what it is. So of course, a classification of the material would already be incredible. So we're thinking about that too. And yeah, she's working with Yoel Fink, very famous fiber guy at MIT. We've launched a collaboration with him to design fibers that can work with this, as well as using off-the-shelf stuff. Tails for humans and zero gravity, another area. We actually tested one. We have designers in our group, architects, and this is Manuel. He's just an incredible thing. It actually works. So this is my summary. I've had it for a long time. I talk with many of you about this. This is all old. We're in that phase transition. We're living in that world. There are many, many questions. It's just the beginning, right? Human presence. How will human presence generalize? Where does self stop? Where does other begin? How do we control access to our attention? A zillion other questions, right? The dark side is close. The bright side is there. We're going to engage with both. We can't just be technical provocateurs like we all have been at Berkeley and very much at the Media Lab. Now the cycle is so fast that we really have to start to weigh in on the other end of it too. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Joe. I appreciate everyone sticking around. I know we went over time, but everyone was very intrigued. So we maybe can take a question or two. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure people can just talk with you afterwards. Is there any burning question that someone will not sleep tonight if they don't ask it right now? Okay, here it is.
So the watches with all the sensors, the medical watches. So what about the medical applications?
Oh, I think already this watch has a heart rate sensor. It can look at heart rate variability and look at arrhythmia to some extent, right? Apple has apps. Roz Picard is probably the person at the Media Lab closest to that because she has started companies that make watches, and Patica is one of her products, dedicated to looking at seizures because GSR can change quite a bit for seizures, one of the most reliable indicators, it turns out. So, but if you have GSR, you can use it for other things. So we're doing that as well.
What is GSR?
Galvanic skin response, skin resistance. And then, of course, you get into the whole lie detector thing, and Roz is very bothered by this now, right? This technology she developed for effective computing to have machines understand emotions can start to be used, to undermine people, right? So, you can tell if somebody's under stress when you really shouldn't have any idea. You can see how they react to things. We use it to try to make environments that change to, adapt to them. But what if you're trying to manipulate somebody? See how they're reacting. It gives you a great edge in trying to perfect your delivery, which for advertising is great. But there's a whole other side to this. So yeah, the medical purposes are there. There's a limited amount you can do with a watch, but use inference models, use other data. You can start doing more and more and more. But definitely getting windows into what people are thinking or how they're thinking or how they feel. That's an area that's opened up tremendously. You bring all these channels together.
Great. Oh, okay. Let's take one more.
You sort of began to mention sort of the darker side. Certainly in current IoT, security is becoming a top level issue, particularly with regard to not just privacy but physical security. Yeah. So do you have any touch with groups that are looking at real dystopian projections in here?
Oh,
or doing it yourself within the group?
We do it ourselves to some extent, more and more. So every paper that we write now has a dystopian paragraph. So we talk about the positive things, but then at the end, in future work, there's always that. I kind of require it now. In our theses, we start to require some ethical comment. And with a pure engineer, that can be tough, but everybody gets the need for it now, so we're trying to put that in. But the Media Lab now is got lots of people that are coming in and out, and we have people that primarily work in areas that are closer to ethics, mainly because of Joe Ito, because he's so driven by the world's problems in many ways, and he's connected to this whole ecosystem of people from Harvard Berkman and places like that. That there's a lot more collaboration now. Some of it is about like Creative Commons kind of launched with Larry Lessig and stuff like that, but now it's issues relating to privacy. Issues relating to information potentially doing physical harm and ways to control it. There's a whole lot there. So there are people in our mix that we talk to quite a bit. And again, being in Boston, just like you guys here, there's so many interesting people that are just a phone call or an email away that will come. I'm actually going to write. I'm doing a special issue of IEEE pervasive computing now. I'm on the editorial board. A few of us are here. It's an academic magazine for Internet of Things, pretty much, IEEE. And I'm doing it on attention in and out. So escaping from ubiquitous surveillance, ways of doing that. We have a few papers coming in talking about that. Also having your attention hijacked. So ways of trying to take back control. I mentioned that's to be a theme of some of our work. And I'm going to write get a piece to be written by Shoshana Zuboff. You guys may know her. I'm not pronouncing her name properly, but she wrote one of the real Bibles on ubiquitous surveillance just less than a year ago. She talks about our Doppel lab and some of our stuff quite a bit there. That's how I got to know the work. But she's an intriguing, really legal scholar voice in this whole space, and an alarmist in many ways. She knows the work is going on. She's rational about it, but what are the many, many ways it can go wrong? So I'm reaching out to her to bring her into this dialogue with people doing Internet of Things.
Okay. I want to thank you for continuing to inspire us and bringing also the ethics to the forefront as well. And I'm really excited to see what will kind of evolve from all of that. I know folks want to interact. I think Joe has a couple minutes after the talk, so I invite you to come up and have some time with him. Let's thank Professor Joe Paradiso again.
Thank you very much.